Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I'm going to be doing another entry into my album ranking sort of series, looking at a particular year and then ranking all of the albums I own from that year. So I'm going to be doing 1986 today. I own a grand total of 35 albums, so I'm going to be whizzing through those like today and ranking them like in order like of how how good or bad like I think they are. So basically, like I said, this is everything I own from 1986. So if there are any kind of obvious ones like which I'm missing, please do let me know. Like if there's anything like if let's say one of your favorite albums like from like 86 which I've not shown, it's simply because I don't own it yet. I'd be really eager to hear those. But anyway, we'll just get stuck into it. Number 35, the worst album of that year for me is Think Visual by The Kinks. This is just a very patchy album, very uninspired. Good opening song, Working at the Factory, is good, but then it just gets very uninspired. There's a couple of terrible songs on here, things like Sleazy Town and Rock and Roll Cities, just rubbish. And it's a poor album, this, from The Kinks. Okay, next up at number 34 is a more recent purchase, actually. It's by a band called Blue Aeroplanes, and it's an album called Tolerance. Now, again, I can't remember exactly why I bought this. I think they were perhaps featured on this. There's a great YouTube channel called Perfect Pop Songs, and it's usually kind of all power pop and kind of new wave sort of songs on there. And I think one of their songs were featured on it, and thought, okay, I quite like the sound of that. But maybe this isn't the album I should have started with, because this is very post-punky, you know. Quite abrasive, this one here. Lots of kind of spoken word, very messy kind of musical backing on it. And it's just not a brilliant record. I think the standout track is called When the Waves Come, which is an actual good song. All the rest of them are very much like more kind of mood pieces than anything else. Okay, next up at number 33, we've got actually another band from Bristol, which is The Brilliant Corners, and this is the album What's in a Word. Now this is, when I say an album, it's like an 8-track kind of thing, this here, so this was probably too much for an EP, but maybe not enough for a kind of to call like a full-length album. They're a kind of indie pop jangle band I got for at the time. Some fun tracks on here, but a little bit unremarkable, like I'd say. Definitely they got a lot better on the next album they did called Somebody Up There Likes Me, which is a great record. This one here, just a bit patchy. The Brilliant Corners at number 33. Number 32 now, quite a well-known band now, Talking Heads. I've got number 32 with the album True Stories here, so you might think this one is quite low, and I suppose it is, but this is for me the Talking Heads' worst album. It just seems very uninspired, this record, and it's almost like they made it a little bit too quickly. Like they kind of had a couple of years out when they made Little Creatures, which is a great pop album, and then this came out immediately like the following year, and I just think that if they'd maybe taken the time a little bit over this album, I know it kind of came out, there was a kind of film around it as well. It just feels like it just was very rushed. It lacks the sort of experimental kind of nature, like I guess, or something like the earlier albums, like kind of like the Eno era, like off Talking Heads, and also just lacks for me the kind of commercial sparkle like that was on like Little Creatures, like great songs on that album. Just all seem to be absent on here. The highlight is Wild Wild Life, which was the single, but aside from that, there's not a whole lot else on this album like worth revisiting for me. Okay, next up at number 31, I've got an album, another one from my uncle's collection, which is where I guess a lot of these ones possibly do originate. So this is The, and it's an album called Infected. Now, so yeah, The Matt Johnson kind of sort of alternative band, I guess, from the kind of, of course, like the 80s. This is quite a unique album for me, quite an abrasive album, a lot of angst on it, but also some quite interesting musical backing as well. It's quite synthesizer heavy, and sort of this big kind of broody brooding drum sound. It's quite a unique sounding album for me. Some political kind of lyrics on it as well, particularly on the track Heartland, which I think was like the only big, I think it was a top 40 single from this album. That's a good song, but just certainly like by kind of like the second half, there's a couple of quite weak tracks on here personally for me. They called like the second half, but first half started off quite well. So yeah, Infected by Another. Okay, that's not now for me. Number 30, we have got an album by the 3 O'Clock. This is called Ever After. So 3 O'Clock, Paisley Underground band. Yeah, this is their third album, and little bit of, and definitely for me, a dip in quality compared to their earlier 2 albums, which in many cases this shouldn't have been. You know, they've got Ian Brody producing this here, of course, of like the Lightning Seeds, and he'd worked with lots of great people before then, but for me this album is just very, very keyboard heavy. It sounds quite dated, I think, by today's standards. You know, like 3 O'Clock, like their earlier albums have got a kind of 60s throwback feel, but this one feels very much off its time and feels now consequently very, very, very dated. There's a couple of standout tracks like Look Into Our Eyes, and I think what was the other one, like If You Could See My Way, I quite liked as well, but yeah, quite patchy, a little bit like uninspired. Next up now for me, number 29, I've got an album by a band called The Call. This one is called Reconciled. So overall this is a good album for me. Production wise, a little heavy-handed, I would say. Lots of synths, very 80s drums, a very dated sounding album. The songs are generally good, maybe a little bit on the forgettable side, but maybe need to give this one a bit more of a chance, because I think I only bought this one last year at some point, so yeah, maybe not fully spent enough time with it. Next up now, at number 28, I've got another third album here. This is The Seer by Big Country. So yeah, by this point, Big Country's star was kind of starting to fade a little bit. You know, they're kind of a bit of a one-album wonder, you know, like their debut, The Crossing, is such a wonderful, wonderful record from 1983, and then to be honest, like on like their subsequent albums, it really was just a case of like diminishing returns. And there's a couple of really good tracks on here. Look Away is a Big Country classic and is a really, really good song. But it definitely does feel like a band who are treading water and relying on a kind of tried and tested sound and formula. But it's still not bad. It's still a good record. It's still a good sound like that, like they produce like Big Country. So yeah, I've got this one. Yep, at number 28. Okay, next up now, number 27, is one of the biggest albums of the year for me. It's only managed number 27. It's Invisible Touch by Genesis. I must just say, I mean, like, I'm not a big fan of Phil Collins and that kind of era, like, of Genesis. I think I bought this one years and years ago, you know, when I was just kind of getting into records, and this was one that was always kind of batted about as a kind of great album, you know, like, from, like, the 80s. There's a couple of decent tracks on it. I do quite like, I mean, side one is quite good, like Invisible Touch is a good song, I guess, guilty pleasure perhaps, but it is a good song. Land of Confusion was good, and I also quite like the side two, Opener, Anything She Does, but there's just a lot of overblown tracks on here, things like Tonight, I don't really much care for, and then like the Domino suite of songs, again, I could live without it. So yeah, for me, patchy record here. Number 27 is Genesis. Number 26 for me now, I've got a band called Felt here. So this is the album called Forever Breathes the Lonely World. This must be something like their 4th or 5th album here. Certainly for me, one of the most unique sounding albums in my collection. Basically, this album very heavily features Martin Duffy on Hammond organ and kind of keyboards, who's featured on the cover. I think he maybe died last year or maybe like the year before, but basically he's all over like this album. Gives it a very playful, if slightly menacing kind of feeling to it, and it's a good sound, like the organ, like, and guitars interlock so well, and it's a great, you know, like, record to put on. It does almost for me become background music like a little bit, because arrangement wise there's a little variation between the songs, but it's a good record. I do really enjoy it, and it is a unique sounding album as well, and certainly doesn't outstay its welcome like at all. I think it barely scrapes half an hour like in length. So yeah, that is Felt. Okay, next up now at number 25, I've got Stephen Duffy, which is the album Because We Love You. So Stephen Duffy, within a year, would have formed The Lilac Time and would be making these kind of great kind of folk pop kind of masterpieces. But this was him still kind of trying to forge a kind of solo career. He'd had a bit of a hit the year before with the song Kiss Me, was quite a big hit. And he was kind of, sort of wanting to kind of go down the kind of solo artist route. So he had dropped the Tintin kind of mockier from his name, instead just using his actual name, Stephen Duffy. It's an interesting record, this, in some ways, a real mix and kind of a real mix of kind of styles. 80s pop on the first two tracks, and then you've then got a real baroque song on Sunday Supplement. So again, things like Unkiss That Kiss, which are very much attempts at having kind of chart hits. It wouldn't come for him. This would be a big flop off an album, but a good record though, and one I do enjoy from time to time. So yeah, that's Stephen Duffy at number 25. Okay, next up now at number 24 is the only album I own by this band. It's again one which often gets quite a lot of critical praise, but for me it's fallen at number 24 on my list, which is the Go-Betweens, Liberty Bell and the Black Diamond Express. So this is considered to be a great kind of jangle pop classic. For me, it kind of lets this album down a little bit is the production. I just feel is a bit generic and not very interesting. And also the singer's vocal as well. I think is it Robert Foster's the lead vocalist, and yeah, I mean, I'm just not a massive fan of his voice. It's funny enough, my favourite track on here is called "In the Court of a Flame," which is actually sung by the other guy, the band Grant McLennan. So I would have maybe liked to have seen him take a few more lead vocals on this album. But otherwise, it is still a good record though, one which potentially needs again a bit more time to grow on me. Okay, now at number 23, we have got again one of the big hit albums of the year, which was So by Peter Gabriel. So yeah, this is easily Peter Gabriel's most commercial album. You know, it kind of very excessive kind of album. Kicks off with Red Rain, which is this very dramatic opener. You've got Sledgehammer, his kind of big kind of pop hit. This album for me is anything but subtle. There's a couple of tracks in here which I'm not massive on, particularly Big Time I don't much care for. And also, to be honest, again, this is going to be a bit of a hot take, but I'm not massive on Don't Give Up, which is his duet with Kate Bush. I can kind of take it or leave it that song. But there's a couple of great tracks, other great tracks though, and I absolutely adore In Your Eyes. That's one of the songs of the year for me. And then I like the two kind of non-singles on here, That Voice Again and Mercy Street. I think are both really good. So yeah, a mixed bag here, but mostly good quality songs here though. But yeah, for me, I do personally prefer his earlier solo albums. Next up now at number 22, I've got an album by the Dream Syndicate. This is called Out of the Grey. So I think this was either their second or third album, kind of an American alternative, underground band. Quite 60s influences, but maybe more kind of psychedelic kind of rock influences. This one is a more mainstream kind of sounding album, certainly when compared to some of the earlier stuff, which almost has a more angular kind of post-punk sort of feel to it. But this is one that, they attempted to get noticed with this, but it did absolutely nothing. I think they broke up shortly after it came out. Great soaring guitar sounds on here. Maybe the songs themselves are not maybe super earwormy, but for the sound of this record, it just sounds great. It's one I do always enjoy putting on, and always get very impressed with the production and the musicianship on it. Okay, just missing out a place on the top 20. At number 21 is the album Stutter by James. So this is the debut album, and this is a very much a rough and ready kind of album from them. A couple of standout tracks, So Many Ways, I think was the main single, and is a brilliant song, James classic there for me. It's just got a kind of certain rawness to it, this album, which I guess a lot of other albums which I'm showing kind of don't, it was a year for kind of not quite like overproduction, but certainly producing things well and making them sound good. But this one just has this kind of rawness and this sort of like DIY feel to it, which I guess, like as I said, a lot of other albums from this year kind of don't have. So yeah, a unique record, but yeah, certainly not my favourite James album by any means. Okay, next up now for me at number 20, I've got World Party, the album Private Revolution. So this was basically a kind of band, but I use the term band as kind of loosely, like as I can. Carl Wallinger, who's the guy in World Party, basically was in the Waterboys for like a few years, but they did the album. This is the C like in 1985. He got fed up and like left, sort of making this kind of solo album. And like when I say a solo album, I really do mean a solo album, because I think he basically plays almost every single instrument like on like this album. It's ahead of its time in the sense that it's very Beatlesy, very 60s influence, when that maybe wouldn't be exactly in vogue maybe until like the early 90s perhaps, like, you know, like kind of making sort of things like Tears for Fears, so Sowing the Seeds of Love kind of thing, you know. This was kind of doing that like a good couple like of like years like before. Good lyrics, quite environmental kind of lyrical themes on it, and yeah, all round good records here. So yeah, World Party, Private Revolution. Next up now at number 19, I've got Big World, which is by Joe Jackson. So this is quite an interesting record, like in quite a few ways. Firstly, it's a three-sided album, so you get like 2 LPs, but only one side of music on the second album, and it's also a live album as well, which might just which in many cases would disqualify it from this list, but it contains all original material kind of exclusive to this album, you know, like there's no like earlier Joe Jackson hits like on it, you know, this is all new songs like which like they recorded live like in front of like an audience, and yeah, it really gives it a kind of, certainly on some like the earlier sides, a real kind of energy to it, which I guess if they'd had the time to labour over this album, like in like the studio, probably would have, yes, slightly like worn it down like a little bit. It's also quite like, you know, there's also quite a lot of musical styles like on here. Like so, like the second side is more experimental and jazzy, and then there's a kind of some great songs towards the end, Hometown and Man in the Street. The 2 closing tracks are just absolutely brilliant. Joe Jackson classics there for me. So it really ends the album like on like a high note. So yeah, Big World comes in at number 19. Okay, let's start now at number 18. It's probably one that I've overlooked, I guess, like kind of since I bought it. Like I did review it though, and I maybe wasn't too kind about it, but certainly like kind of revisiting it for this video, it comes in at number 18. So it's The Bible and the album Walking the Ghost Back Home. Again, this is one of those albums where it's not quite an EP, but like it's not quite an album either. Like there's 8 tracks on here, and surprisingly, I mean, they cover quite a lot of ground like on this album. You know, Graceland is this kind of great kind of folky sort of Django classic. Mahalia has got this great kind of sax on it, and then Walking the Ghost Back Home almost has this kind of prefab sprouty kind of feel to it. So it's certainly one which was a lot better than I remembered it being. And yeah, again, a lot of variety like on here, so yeah, one I did really enjoy. Okay, next up now at number 17, we've got Billy Bragg and Talking with the Taxman about poetry. So this was his 3rd album, and it was maybe a little bit of a kind of departure from him. I think all his previous albums had basically just been him and his guitar, you know, complete solo recordings. But this one, he's bringing in different musicians on here, gives it a much fuller sound, and he's kind of got, there's some of his all-time best songs, Greetings to the New Brunette, Ideology, The Marriage, there's Power in a Union. There's some great songs like on here, and like again, like some great like guest appearances like from the likes of Kirsty MacColl and Johnny Marr. So yeah, great record here, and I'm quite glad that like he's fleshed out his sound a bit, he's trying new things, and also writing, I think, some of the best songs like of his career. Okay, next up now, number 16 is an underrated album by the Liverpool synth-pop duo China Crisis, What Price Paradise. So this is, a good record here, a little bit more fun and certainly a lot less serious and sophisticated than Flaunt the Imperfections, the album before, which had Walter Becker producing. This one is a Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley production, so it's a lot more fun and free sort of like feeling like to it. A couple of great tracks in here, particularly things like Arizona Sky and Best Kept Secret is one of my favourite China Crisis songs. So yeah, like there's a lot of good tracks like worth like revisiting like on here. So yeah, it comes in at number 16. Okay, next up now at number 15, I've got an album by a band called The Big Dish, and this is the album Swimmer. So Big Dish were a kind of Scottish sort of indie sort of pop band, never really found much success aside from supporting the likes of Lloyd Cole, Big Country and Del Amici like in concert. But there's a couple of absolute standout tracks in it for me. Prospect Street is one of the great lost 80s singles, you know, could have been a hit like in like an alternative like universe. It's a great song. Christina's World's fantastic. Slide, Big New Beginnings. There's just a lot of really good, very solid songs, very well produced album here, but not too overproduced either, you know. I think it's got a nice kind of production on it, and yeah, it's all round just a really underrated record. So yeah, The Big Dish at number 15. Okay, now I've got a couple of records here which you might say I've got maybe a little bit high just because I'm a sort of big fan of both of these artists here, and I guess most people consider these among these bands like sort of worst albums, but I actually do really like both of these. So yeah, number 14 is ELO and Balance of Power. So this was the band's final album, considered very much a disappointment like the time like all round in terms of both sort of Jeff Lynne's more downbeat and kind of sort of sad, sour lyrics to its very poor commercial performance like as well, very much ended ELO's career like on like a damp squib. However, for me, I think this is a really underrated record with some absolutely classic songs on it. Yeah, gone are the orchestral elements, like, you know, which is probably why it's not thought of so well like among like ELO fans, but I think there's some great tracks, things like So Serious, Getting to the Point, Secret Lives, Without Someone, Send It. It's a really fun little closer. So yeah, like there's a lot of tracks like of merit on here, but it's possibly so high up like on my list just as kind of nostalgia, you know, like it's a record which I've always enjoyed. I've always been a big like ELO fan, and I think this is very much unfairly criticised like as a bad album. And like as I was saying, similar kind of thing to that, except now with Paul McCartney, I've got a Press to Play at number 13 on my list. So this was, to all intents and purposes, a very, very difficult album to record and make. Lots of competing egos like in like the studio, including Hugh Padgham, and like Eric Stewart was involved a bit as well. He thought he was producing the album, but it turned out not to be. So it was quite a strange kind of making of this album. But there's some really good tracks on here though, and some interesting tracks as well. Like, you know, McCartney in the 80s was often seen as being sort of taking it very safe and being like quite predictable, making music for like sort of doing stuff like Ebony and Ivory and the Frog Chorus and all those kind of sort of very kind of sugary sweet kind of songs, like sort of like very pop songs, like, you know. But on this album he's taken some risks. There's things like Pretty Little Head, which has this, it's just this crazy song, you know. It's definitely the most experimental I think he's been like on like a kind of McCartney solo album. And then there's things like Talk More Talk, which not a brilliant track, but certainly an interesting song. Good Times Coming, I've always enjoyed. Stranglehold at Hold, I think, is a solid opener. I quite like the closing track, however absurd, and Footprints is a real hidden gem. So there's a lot of stuff like of merit like on this album, and I think it's unfairly derided like as a bad album like off McCartney's. I think it's good. I think it's a decent record, and it comes in at number 13 on my list. Okay, next up now at number 12, I've got the Chameleons here. This is an album called Strange Times. This was their third album, and this is again a kind of slight tilt towards the kind of mainstream. Very expansive sounding album. Like certainly like there's brilliant tracks there, things like Swamp Thing, like Time, End of Time, just great stuff. There's a couple of slightly slower tracks on here, like as well, Caution and Tears, are both quite kind of like, it kind of kicks off Mad Jack's a big grand opener, and then you get a couple of like these kind of slightly quieter like acoustic moments, but then second side I think is possibly like stronger, and it's just got that perfect balance, I think, for me, between the kind of light and the dark. You know, the production's just so big, but the lyrics are quite dark and quite claustrophobic and that. But what a record I do really, really enjoy. So yeah, that's Strange Times by the Chameleons. Okay, that's not for me. At number 11, I've got, just missing out on the top 10, it's Brotherhood by New Order. So this one is a decent, solid album here, but possibly one of New Order's weaker ones up to this point, like, in time. It's kind of almost split into two halves, this, like, in a bit. Side one is more guitar sort of driven, so tracks like Weirdo and the opening song, which I forget what it's called, but the opening track is like quite guitar heavy. But then the second side, you've got more kind of synth stuff. There's a couple of classics on it, Bizarre Love Triangle being like the standout track. I quite like the closer, like Every Little Counts, like it's quite a fun little track, and kind of shows them, shows that New Order, I guess, also did have like a sense of humour, like as well, like as a band. So no, a good record here, Brotherhood. Okay, we're into the top 10 now, so this is, it's getting exciting now, this list. So yeah, at number 10, I've got an album which, I'll just show it here. So it's King of America by Elvis Costello, or rather, I think it was credited to the Costello Show, like when it originally came out. So I have reviewed this album on my channel. This is maybe about, say, I think it was 2018. I've got noted here that I reviewed it. I think because someone asked for it. And back then, I really didn't like this album. I think I gave it a ridiculous score, something like 68% or something like that, just giving songs like sort of like 3, 4, 5 out of 10 kind of thing, like for like a lot of like the tracks. Really slagged this album off. But I must say, listening to it with fresh ears over the past couple of weeks, it has really, really grown on me. It is a mature collection of songs, certainly, like this is a Costello album which is far removed from his kind of Nick Lowe kind of productions and that, There's some, like sort of tracks about kind of being in love, tracks about being like out of love, and they cover like a great range of styles, from the kind of great kind of folky stomp of like Brilliant Mistake, rockabilly on tracks like Lovable and The Big Light, and then for me a couple of his greatest ballads, things like The Jack of All Parades is just great, and I really like Suit of Lights like as well. I mean, I'm not going to say that everything on this album is brilliant. There's a couple of throwaways, particularly Eisenhower Blues is terrible, one of his worst songs, and Poison Rose I think is just a bit boring, and there's a couple like that. I think it's like that one, Poison Rose, and Sleep of the Just, like as the closer, are maybe like a little bit boring, but the rest of this album is really, really good. So yeah, pleased it has grown on me. Elvis Costello, King of America, comes in at number 10. Next up now at number 9, again, you might think I've maybe got this one a bit too high, but I just really, really enjoyed this album that when like I was kind of listening to all these in preparation for this video. So it's the Smithereens and the album Especially For You. So this is another debut album, and this is just great. For me, the opener, Strangers When We Meet, is the standout. It's an absolute power pop classic, and it's just got this great, very tight kind of 60s influence, great vocal harmonies on it, and just very, very, very catchy songs. For me, the best album off theirs, like certainly like what I've heard like off theirs. I've got 3 of their albums now, and for me, this is the best one. So that's the Smithereens at number 9. Okay, now at number 8 on my list, I've got R.E.M. and the album Life's Rich Pageant. So going into this video, this is probably the album from R.E.M. which I knew the least, and it's ironic because this was actually the only one that my uncle owned, like Lights, or like what I got from like his like collection. So this was another kind of tilt for R.E.M. towards the mainstream, and certainly that they've been kind of hinting at it on albums like Reckoning and Fables of the Reconstruction, but this is just another dial towards kind of becoming the biggest American band like off like the late 80s, early 90s. Much cleaner, much slicker production, but I think that the songs do still really stand up. There's a couple of absolute standouts. The Flowers of Guatemala is brilliant song. And then also Just a Touch, a real frantic rocker, certainly one of REM's best. So yeah, a lot of really great material like on here, and yeah, continuing a fantastic run of albums. Okay, next up now at number 7 is another debut album here. So I've got Crowded House, and a self-titled album, Crowded House. So this, for me, song for song, is probably one of the strongest releases of the year. So running through the chat list, you got things like World Where You Live, Now We're Getting Somewhere, Don't Dream It's Over, Mean to Me, and that's just side 1. Side 2, you've got stuff like Something So Strong, Hole in the River, I Walk Away, and I think there's a track, because this is like an American pressing, I think there's a track on the UK version which I really love as well, and like would probably give a 9 or a 10 out of 10 to. Just a great record here. For me, slightly soured a little bit by the last 2 tracks. That's What I Call Love and Tombstone are just a bit average for me, but really up to that point, it's quite a faultless album for me. Crowded House comes in at number 7. Okay, next up now at number 6 is another album which I've just only really recently been getting into. It's the second release this year by Elvis Costello, this time with The Attractions, Blood and Chocolate here. So this is a record which I've just overlooked for so many years. I've owned it probably since I kind of started buying Costello records, and it's just one which I've always overlooked. I think partly because I've never been a big fan of the big single, I Want You. I've never really cared too much about that song, and I always just assumed that, the rest of this album's not going to be any good then. But how wrong was I, It says possibly Elvis Costello's best album from the 1980s, certainly second only behind Trust for me, which came out in 1981. It's a real kind of toss-up, but really gives you an idea of how much I really like this album. It's a kind of raw production, this one here, so loud guitars on it, full of emotion, very memorable songs I like as well. He's really got a great knack for melody on this album, so tracks like Blue Chair, Home Is Anywhere You Hang Your Head, Crimes of Paris, they've got great melodies which really stick in your ear. And then other tracks which kind of have a super kind of raw, rough and ready kind of sound to them. Things like Uncomplicated and I Hope You're Happy Now. Almost kind of grungy in their kind of sort of sounds, kind of ethos, So it's a great record. As I said, there's a couple of tracks which I'm not massive on, still not big on I Want You, and also possibly Tokyo Storm Warning goes on a little bit too long for its own good, but great record here though, and one which sad that I overlooked for so long. Okay, now we're into the top 5 now. For me, this top 5 has probably stayed pretty consistent for maybe, say, the last, 2 or 3 years. These are my top 5, but the order I've kind of struggled with a little bit. Simply because all these albums are probably worthy of the number 1 spot on any given day. But I've decided to go for this kind of order here, so we'll see what you think of this. So at number 5 I've got Talk, Colour of Spring here. So this is just an absolutely stunning album. It's the 3rd or 4th album by Mark Hollis and co, and it's a great mixture of both such a lush production but also this this emotional rawness in his voice and the songs that he's doing. Great kind of it's certainly for me one of the best sounding albums. There's moments on here where it's just full on, so things like Life's What You Make It, Living in Another World, but then other quieter moments as well, like Chameleon Day and Time It's Time is just such a gorgeous closer. So there's a lot of stuff of merit on this album for me, and we'll come in at number 5. Number 4 for me is XTC and Skylarkin. So this is a great album. This was one which was quite difficult for the band to make. We were working with producer Todd Rundgren, and him and Andy Partridge famously butted heads throughout the making of this album, but it certainly paid off. You know, this is certainly XTC's most complete and fully formed album, like I would say. It certainly helped that, like, kind of Rundgren kind of selected the running order and what tracks they were going to do before they even recorded a note. So it's got this kind of flow to it. It's almost like there is, like in theory anyway, like no filler like on this album. For me, the reason why it is coming in at number 4 is just because in amongst XTC classics, so the opening pair of Summer's Cauldron Grass, that's really Super Girl, Season Cycle, Earn Enough for Us, some of my all-time favourite XTC songs. There's just a couple of tracks now which I'm not 100% sold on, so things like The Man Who Sailed Around His Soul, and then things like Bally for a Rainy Day, A Thousand Umbrellas, and Again, I like all the songs on this album, but those ones I would struggle to kind of say are among my favourite, like XTC, like songs, like for me. But still a great record though, and yeah, would come in at number 4. Okay, number 3 for me, I've got Graceland by Paul Simon. So this is perhaps more of a nostalgia thing for me, certainly because Paul Simon was one of the first artists, aside from the Beatles and kind of Paul McCartney, that I kind of got into, and it was probably like in a big part thanks to this album being sort of as good like it is. You know, it's a diverse album musically, so Simon was always kind of cherry picking, I guess, like sort of like the kind of different musicians and kind of groups that like he was kind of working with like on this album. So it really gives the album a good sense of variety. Like no two songs of here like sound the same. He's kind of dabbling in lots of different styles of kind of like African music, and he's sort of got so he's got this really interesting music going on, and he combines that with, I think, some of the very best songs like he's ever wrote. Things like Boy in the Bubble, Graceland, the lyrics on that just never failed to move me. Diamonds on the Soles of the Shoes is an all-time classic, and of course like You Can Call Me Al, like again like more like the big pop hits like off the year, but I think is a much stronger song than it's ever given like credit for. So yeah, a great record here. Graceland will come in at number 3. Number 2 now for me. Again, this is one which I'm struggling with. Maybe I've got too high. I think it would still be like top 5, but yeah, it's anyway, I'll just show it. So it's the Housemartins at number 2. I've got London Nil Hull 4. So this one is a great debut album here. The Housemartins just arrived absolutely fully formed, like, you know, like they knew exactly what they were wanting to do on this album, and they go out and do it so well. There's a kind of it's a slightly political album, like in many of like the lyrics. So tracks like Sheep and Flag Day, which is about the kind of like bemoaning like the need for kind of charity. Get Up Off Our Knees is a kind of go at like organised religion. Then there's brilliant, and then there's more tender moments, things like Think for a Minute, and then great closer like Freedom. So it's quite a uniform sounding album, which is maybe the one criticism of it. You know, a lot of the tracks here do sound the same. It sounds very quickly recorded, with sort of very kind of simple like instrumentation, but that's probably also its strength. You know, it has this immediacy, it has this kind of vibrancy. It doesn't feel like it's overworked or like overblown like by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, the Housemartins would come in at number 2. But at number 1 for me, possibly no surprise, I've got The Queen Is Dead by The Smiths at number 1. So this is just an all-time classic. The Smiths at their absolute peak on this album, both in terms of kind of how they sounded on record, so in terms of production, with kind of, like Johnny Marr's guitar sound just absolutely perfected like on this album, and then Morrissey writing some of his very best lyrics. It's got a lot of musical variety on here, from its rollicking title track to the hilariously kind of vaudevillian Frankly Mr. Shankly, and then like I Know It's Over, the heartbreaking ballad, and that's just the first 3 tracks, like, you know. It's a very varied album, very interesting record, and then some couple of great tracks like on side 2 as well, you know, things like Big Mouth Strikes Again, Boy with a Thorn in His Side, There's a Light, Some Girls Big on It. Just a very consistently good album throughout, and it's for me would be my favourite from 1986. So yeah, that's me come to the end of this video ranking all of my albums which I own from 1986. So yes, I hope you have enjoyed. I would be interested to know what some of your favourites are from 1986 in the comments below. And yep, I'll see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.